Bresnix.com. Welcome back to the BresnixCast. We're at episode 49 now, and we're going to talk about Mechanical Animals, the 1998 seminal Marilyn Manson album. I should just mention before we get started, if you haven't listened to my album and if you're not following me on Twitter at Vladimir Bresnix, then I don't even know what to tell you. You're making mistakes in life. So I started listening to Marilyn Manson when I was in like secondary school, so we're talking like the late 90s, early 2000s. The first album I remember getting was Smells Like Children, and that's when Manson was doing his kind of creepy Willy Wonka bit before kind of Johnny Depp gave it a try. And I remember when Mechanical Animals came out actually, and I was quite young at the time, and I got it for Christmas. My mad staunch Catholic mother, for some reason, bought me it for Christmas, or maybe it was Santa. But I remember at the time thinking it was like so cool and edgy, and it was mostly for the superficial reasons because I was so young and I didn't understand a lot of the stuff behind it. I didn't understand it in any deeper level. Just in the basic of the band looked weird and there was edgy lyrics and all that kind of thing. And that's what drew me in the first place. But after getting older and listening to it, and then knowing about obviously 70s glam rock and stuff like that, you get more of an idea of what he's trying to say. So basically, there's kind of what Manson intended and what I'm going to project onto it, and they're probably, well, I'd say they're definitely two different things. But as the time I had Frank on from Fenn, he said that all art is subjective, and I think obviously where Manson's coming from, we will go into that. Like this satirization of like celebrity culture, and it's done through the lens of like this kind of whole 70s glam rock sort of thing. It's very Bowie inspired and that sort of stuff, but in a way he like he sort of predicts a lot of things about 20 years on. That's what's going to be interesting about this, just to look 20 years on to the kind of world that he was talking about at that time, and then what the world looks like now. It's quite interesting to delve into that sort of thing. But yeah, so I went to see Manson 2012 when he did the Twins of Evil tour with Rob Zombie. And it was interesting because it was a kind of time in his career when he was almost like doing his greatest hits bit, because like it was a really good gig, don't get me wrong, but it was like, he was doing all the eras and the songs from the eras, and then the sets would change and his costumes would change depending on what eras he was doing. And obviously when he got to Mechanical Animals, it was very colourful and flashy, the big lighted sign saying drugs behind him, that kind of thing. But I remember being at that gig and looking about, and I noticed that everyone there was kind of like 20s, early 30s sort of thing. And that's when I realized that like Manson had been around so long that he'd be, like 15 years, 10, 15 years out, it would have been for like teenagers and stuff, probably the same people. But that's what happens. There comes like a point with artists when like it seems that they stop picking up young people, and then they have this kind of core group of fans that, for the most part, that seem to follow them. I mean, if you go to a Rod Stewart gig now, I don't assume you'll see many 15-year-old girls, but I would put my house and a lot of money on the fact that you'll see a lot of 60-year-old women for sure. And that's just what happens. And it even happens with like edgy goths like Marilyn Manson, which is kind of funny. But anyway, let's get more kind of into it. That was just my own personal anecdote. So I've always kind of thought that Manson was the logical conclusion of Alice Cooper, because he took things further and stuff. But I don't know, there's kind of a difference. I've seen Alice Cooper live as well, and I think with Manson there is more to it. With Manson it is more shocking and it can be more vulgar and stuff, but in a way Alice Cooper was kind of like sort of hammer horror kind of thing, and now it's very kind of milk toast. But there was Manson like ripping pages out of Bibles and things like that. He was always taking it, I think, pretty much as far as he could without being like arrested or put in jail, which he probably was at some points as well. And it's interesting. So what kind of before Mechanical Animals, there was a much darker aesthetic going on, like Antichrist Superstar and all that. It was a much darker, more kind of horror based aesthetic. And funnily enough, that's when Trent Reznor was involved. And Mechanical Animals was the first album without Reznor's involvement, which is interesting. But obviously, then because they're taking like a cue from this sort of 70s glam rock thing, it's so much more colourful. It's bright, but still done in the classic Manson sort of way. there's still something sort of creepy about it. And so let me just I'll give you the quote, basic story behind it so that we're on the same page. So, quote, in the album, Manson takes on the role of glam rocking, substance addicted, gender ambiguous alien messiah called Omega. David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust, like that. Falls down to earth, is captured, placed with a band called the Mechanical Animals, and turned into a rock star product. He has become numb to the world, either lost or high in outer space or the Hollywood Hills, through excessive drug use as a coping mechanism with his life as a product of his corporate masters. Manson's other role is that of Alpha, who is based on himself and his experiences around the conclusion of the Antichrist Superstar tour and era. Acting as Omega's foil, Alpha's emotions have only begun seeping back. Vulnerable and trying to relearn how to use them properly, he despairs about how little emotion other people feel, observing them to be mechanical animals. So that gives you kind of a thing. And there's 14 songs, 7 are from this kind of Omega perspective, and they're the more narcissistic and kind of superficial ones, and then the other 7 are from this kind of Alpha perspective, which is kind of interesting as well. Manson actually said in Rolling Stone, and there's another quote for you: Mechanical Animals was to represent the point where the revolution got sold out, a hollow shell of what the essence of Marilyn Manson was. It was a satire, and a lot of people interpreted this is what he really is. I was making a mockery of what I was, taking a shot at myself, which is kind of interesting. So it is, like I said, it's very satirical. It's very kind of, I think the word I would use as well is hyperreal. Even if you watch the videos and all that with all the colors and everything, it is kind of, it's mental, and it is pretty hyperreal is probably the best word. I'm going to go through some of the songs because some of the lyrics, I can expound on them. And like I said, keep in mind there's what Manson intended to do and what I'm extrapolating 20 years after the fact, which are two different things. So it kicks off with Great Big White World, and you can actually, like I did originally, interpret this song racially, but that Manson cleared this up later and said it was actually about cocaine, which then got me thinking of, if you ever read William Burroughs' first book before he started doing all the mad stuff like Naked Lunch and all that. His first book was a kind of straight novel called Junkie, about him being a junkie, funnily enough. And he says in that book, and this is so true of any kind of addiction, and we will get into this, because I mean Manson did say that the album is about addiction as well, but not just to like literal drugs, but also to other things like religion or television or stuff like that, and we will get into that. Um, yeah, but so what Burroughs said in that book was that everything, basically when you're a junkie, he's talking about heroin specifically, everything in your life narrows down to junk. And that's kind of like what sort of Manson's getting at. The other interesting thing as well is a lot of the songs from Mechanical Animals were recorded in Manson's home studio in the Hollywood Hills, which they called the White Room because he painted it all white. So like he mentions that whole kind of thing like a lot of times, He also said as well, the theme of whiteness comes up a lot in the album, representing a void of empty color and feelings and emotions. We were trying to fill that void with the songs. And the kind of void thing, I suppose, is sort of like an interesting thing to think about now, because it does feel like, even though I'm not a sort of church lady style moralist, it does feel like the world isn't a kind of, I don't know, it's weird for me because in a lot of ways I'm kind of a moral nihilist, but like I do kind of like understand that in a lot of ways the world is in like a kind of weird moral tailspin, because like, there was this idea to tear down sort of like traditional religions that had say underpinned like the Western world and stuff. But then this is what a lot of people are talking about now. You can tear these structures down, but then you've got nothing to replace them with. They've got no other structure, not even something like Stoicism or something like that. Um, so that's kind of an interesting point as well. Um, Not that I'm any great fan of any Abrahamic religions, because I'm not particularly, but it's interesting. You could make an argument of their use for the general public as like passing down, say less risky behaviors or stuff like that. But then, if you get rid of that, we're finding out now what happens. Like, what is? I mean, even people like Nietzsche wrote and stuff about what he thought would happen if, like, the we got rid of like these traditional structures and that, but like we were really getting into like a post-Christian world, post-Christian Western world more and more. And again, this is one of these things, like I'm going to talk about how we don't know like what's going to become of that. It's sort of anyone's guess, And funnily enough, later on in that song, he said, "I'm not attached to your world. Nothing heals, nothing grows. It's a great big white world. We're drained of our colours. We used to love ourselves. We used to love one another." And I know there's this kind of whole myth about the past and stuff, but in a way, I'm going to kind of make the case that you can look at this album as almost like predicting a lot of the modern world, because when you think about now, I mean, there's even psychiatrists and things. Well, I'm skeptical of a lot of psychiatry. They're talking about like internet addiction and stuff like that. And I mean, I think for sure, I mean, the internet has changed and stuff, because young people are talking about how they're more isolated than ever. And that's because like before the internet, if you were like socially anxious or socially awkward or whatever, you didn't have this other way of communicating that was so where you could be anonymous and all this kind of thing. You would have to go over that eventually or put yourself in uncomfortable situations to deal with that. But nowadays, not so much. You can order stuff off the internet. You can order your food off the internet. You can order everything else. You can get your entertainment. You can talk to people over the internet. You never actually have to be face to face with a person. So, I mean, surely that's just going to exacerbate these kind of things anyway. If you've got that kind of anxiety around meeting other people, and that's going to happen. And then, like it's that thing that we've talked about quite a bit in the show with other people. It's that whole idea of we're more connected than ever, but more isolated than ever, and I don't know if like rates of autism are linked to the internet or if it's just being diagnosed more. I don't know. Not really my field of expertise, but it is. I mean, it is an interesting phenomenon to watch. And I mean, me personally, from interacting with a lot of younger people, it's not true for all of them, but a lot of them do seem more kind of awkward than, like, say, I remember people of, like, say, my age group being, or even people I know that are older. I mean, that just own personal experience is not exactly an argument, but you know what I mean. And I, I want to move here to the Rock is Dead, right? That was one of the kind of bigger songs on the album as well. I know people have made those Rock is Dead statements and stuff like that, but I mean, rock music has gotten progressively worse since the 1970s, probably. I mean, there was some good bands in the 80s, but there was a lot of shite in the 80s. I mean, for every Guns N' Roses who were on the good side, you had about 10 or 15 Def Leppards and White Snakes. And I don't care if you like those bands, I'm on a crusade against hair metal. Um, I mentioned this in a previous thing, and I'll just slide this in a little bit. It's not really completely related, but it is an interesting kind of thing. So a friend of mine said to me once that he believed that the bad hair metal bands of the 80s were bands that simply didn't understand the blues roots of rock music, and that was his theory as to why their music sucked so hard. Um, we could go into it, but show's not really about that, so I just thought I'd throw it in there. But so anyway, take a bit of Rock is Dead, right? Because this does feed into a bit of what I'm talking about. He says, "Rock is deader than dead, shock, it's all in your head. Your sex and your dope is all that we're fed." I used to think that's all a fad, but it's all that we're fed. So fuck all your protests and put them to bed. God is in the TV. Um, if it's true, I mean, it is like the God is in the TV bit is probably the most important bit of like the whole kind of the whole kind of wee bit there, because I mean, how many people do you know now that you know they believe something and they seem to believe it quite fervently, but that's because wherever they live, wherever they are, that's whoever they associate with, that's the kind of dominant culture. So it's just that they believe what's around them. They've not really examined their belief structures critically from an outside perspective. So that, I mean, I'm sure people like this. I know people like this, that if they were around different media and different people, they would believe something completely the opposite of what they do believe now, and they think they believe it out of their own free will, but they don't look at it critically and they don't really examine arguments against it. So how could you really say that they really do believe it? And a lot of people increasingly are like that. And like TV has, I mean, even TV is taking over for a lot of people as parents. That's not anything new. That's been going on for at least 30 odd years. Kids being sort of raised in front of televisions. definitely not new. I mean, it's been going on for a while, and now it's just more screens. It's more screens, more media, more stuff. Also, kind of more access to stuff you would never see before. You know, like the stuff that's on the internet, you wouldn't have just got that on terrestrial television like 25 years ago. I mean, there's just no way, no, no way at all. Um, but yeah, I used to think that sex in your dope was all a fad, but it's all that we're fed, which is kind of interesting. Um, so he also has a song then called Dissociative. He talks about how like the world is killing him and stuff. And dissociative disorder is a real thing. I've actually had periods of depersonalization and derealization now and again. I don't know if you ever had these, but it's basically when you feel like everything is surreal and you're kind of everything's going on, but it doesn't feel like it's really happening. It's very hard to explain and very weird. You can sometimes just get it for just no reason and it just goes away. Um, but like the American Psychiatric Association says dissociative disorders involve problems with memory, identity, emotion, perception, behavior, and sense of self. Dissociative symptoms can potentially disrupt every area of mental functioning. Um, so when you think about that as well, I mean, if we talk about the internet and stuff, I mean, like it really is detached. I mean, you really are. I mean, what Manson's talking about, obviously, again, something different, but like with the internet you can be anonymous and stuff, so it can lead to your detachment from reality because you can start to believe that you are this persona that you've created on the internet. You know, like maybe you're some big deal on Twitter, but what does that mean in real life? Not much really. Who cares in your real life? Probably not a lot of people, but the people on Twitter probably care. Excuse me. But it's kind of interesting. And you know, I don't know if there's rates of dissociative disorder are going up and stuff, but it's interesting. But like, if we want to look at maybe more the way Manson's talking about it, I mean, celebrities. Uh, I mean, I kind of and all the videos in the Mechanical Animals, like from the songs from the album, you know, Manson's always this kind of like celebrity alien, and that's even kind of the whole kind of concept. And I've often looked at celebrities as being sort of almost alien-like figures because these people that are super famous, their lives are a million miles away from reality, you know, and they're the minority of people because the majority of people just simply don't live like that. So they must have a kind of bizarre existence, especially if you've maybe like grown up in a famous family and you've never had any kind of normality, you know, and it must be a kind of strange hyperreal existence. And then you don't know who likes you for you or who likes you for your money or your status or who you're related to or whatever. And, you know, it's easy for like people and sort of ordinary people to look at famous people and go, oh, that'd be great. They must be happy all the time, you know. But then let's examine famous people's lives. Look at the rates of suicide, drug addiction, divorce, you know, like mental breakdowns. I mean, the whole shebang, you know, like these people have the same issues that you do. It's just that if you're depressed in some shithole flat and some millionaire's depressed on his yacht, it's just a nicer setting. You still feel like shit either way. It kind of doesn't matter when you think about it. You know, like it's all the one. And that's kind of what I took from the kind of like satirization of fame because, you know, almost as like they're almost like a different kind of species of person. It's weird, you know, famous people like I just have no idea what it would be like. You know, that's the thing. I just can't get into that mindset. I can't imagine the stress and the pressure, you know, because when something happens to you, you're not going through a good time in your life, it's bad enough anyway. But if there's people taking pictures of you and filming you and it's plastered all over the world, I mean, I've got no idea what that does to a person. And then it's no wonder there's high rates of drug abuse and stuff like that, you know. And Manson, you know, that's why, you know, the drugs are such a prominent part in this. But like I said, it's not always just literal drugs, you know, it's other drugs too. Um, and that's the thing. And there's actually there's a couple of references to space and stuff like that, which says like a dead astronaut in space and stuff like that. And I just thought about that because everyone compares, you know, a lot of the Mechanical Animals aesthetics and style to Bowie. You know, so obviously everyone thinks of like, you know, Ground Control or Major Tom and all that kind of thing. It's just something I thought about there. Um, but if we stick on this kind of thing of let's look at what Manson's lyrics were there and translate it to kind of where society's going now. Because I mean, it's very kind of it is kind of satirical of culture, the entire album as well, particularly obviously American culture. But you could extrapolate that to Western culture, but it's specifically American in a lot of ways, I would say. Um, Take a song like I Want to Disappear. Look at me now, got no religion. Look at me now, I'm so vacant. Look at me now, I was a virgin. Look at me now, grew up to be a whore, and I want it, I believe it. To be honest, that's the value systems of a lot of people, like I said, I'm kind of like in a lot of ways kind of morally nihilistic, but I still kind of have like a structure that I work within that I go by. I'm not here to moralize to anyone else, but there are certain things that are destructive and don't seem to be working out so well for us. Um, and it's just interesting to see where this is going to go. I mean, do I think we should go back to some kind of rigid morality? I don't necessarily think that should be the case, but I think we do need to have more an examination of the repercussions of things, you know what I mean? Because, I mean, hedonism, I mean, what Manson's basically saying, when we were talking before about rock is dead, your sex and your dope is all that we're fed. I mean, hedonism has for quite a while now, for quite a number of decades, been sort of glorified in a way in the media. We see all these hedonistic rock stars and, film stars and all this kind of thing. And then you try the hedonism bit and it works for a while, but you forget that a lot of these rock stars and that died at like 27, you know what I mean? And then that seems kind of quite old when you're like 15 or whatever. But then when you're actually 27, you're like, wow, this is not old at all. I'm only getting started here. And that's the thing. So the hedonism bit does work for a while. And I certainly wouldn't say don't do it. I mean, do it, but you're going to take the consequences. It's like anything else. It's like when Hunter Thompson said, you buy the ticket, you take the ride. This is exactly what he was talking about. You know what I mean? Like, so if you want to go down that road, go for it. I mean, many of us have gone down that road, but if you keep going down, you'll eventually hit the wall. And then you'll know when you hit the wall, you won't need me to tell you, because when you hit the wall, you'll hit it pretty fucking hard. And then you'll probably think, was this the best course of action? I mean, you could say possibly, maybe, because maybe it teaches you something that you wouldn't have learned otherwise. But surely there's less painful ways to learn. But he even says things like, or he says, "Mommy's like, I don't like to sound American. I'm just saying, Moz or Moz are lost now. Daddy's someone else. We love the abuse because it makes us feel like we're needed now." And that is just quite a bleak picture. But I mean, with like, there just seems to be so much breakdown in society these days. There seems to be so many people that are, what I think is kind of there. I know I'm sounding kind of like a moaning. That's probably a Scottish thing. It's more cultural than anything else. I do think what's good about the kind of modern age, I think probably we're thinking more about things like, you know, how does like, how are you raised as a child? How does that affect when you grow up? How does your environment affect you? How does abuse affect you? Like in more people, it's less of a stigma now for people, especially men, to sort of like explore these things, themselves and their feelings and all that, whereas that might have been, taboo at some point. So that's probably a good thing as well. But I think that like society is becoming, I hate using the word degenerate. I don't really like that kind of term, but I think it's contracting. Let's put it that way. I think society is going a certain way, and I don't think we know where it's going. It's one of these things, the curse of living in interesting times. I mean, everything is getting incredibly polarized. We even see things like, politics going to extremes on the left and the right, and things seem to be like really contracting, people like forming into their teams and things like that. So, it's very kind of uncertain. It's a very uncertain sort of future, but I do think in a way you could extrapolate a lot of this as being like quite relevant to, what's happening just now. And I mean, he is constantly, he's constantly talking about people being disposable and like, I mean, like, and user friendly is like, I'm not in love, but I'm going to fuck you till somebody better comes along. Use me like I was a whore. Relationships are such a bore. Delete the ones that you fucked, and it's the whole album's kind of like that. It's like people are disposable, there's no real connection with anyone. It's this is remember he's writing this shit before you could just swipe somebody on Tinder and go and bang them and not really know who they are. Like I mean, there was obviously always prostitutes and things like that, but I think we're in a kind of new level now. you know. But I mean, I'm going on about society and stuff. I mean, I don't have any answers. This is generally more of a music podcast, but you know me, I like to read far too much into things because it's more fun that way. Um, so let's go to the drugs part, right? Because excuse me, clearly the drugs are a major theme of this album. You know, right? I'm hydrated. It should be better now. So the dope show. Everyone knows the dope show. We're all stars now, and that's a very. I mean, you can tell that's a song. I mean, you can tell Manson's done drugs because of the way he writes about drugs. You know, um, for example, like even in the dope show, you know, like the drugs they make us feel so hollow. We love in vain, narcissistic and so shallow. You know, cops and queers to swim, you have to swallow. Hate today, no love for tomorrow. I mean, particularly hate today, no love for tomorrow. That encapsulates, you know, like drug addiction in a nutshell, really, because it's true. You know, like you're not I mean, if you're drinking, you're doing drugs, you're running away from some kind of evil that's either within you or has happened to you or something like that, you know, or something terrible, or even like something that seems benign to other people. Like some people think if you say to someone like, I became a terrible drug addict because of my anxiety, and people will be like, anxiety about what? You know, but it's different if you've got an anxiety disorder, because then you know, it's only if you've got that kind of thing. Like a panic attack to someone doesn't sound like anything, but then that same person could have a panic attack and think they're having a heart attack. You know, it happens a lot. People end up in hospital thinking they're having a heart attack when they're simply having a panic attack, and all they need to do is just chill out for 10 minutes. But it's just one of those things, you know. Obviously, in Manson's character in the dope show, you know, like he draws a distinction as well between there is like two kind of drug worlds, you know, because there's the drug world you see on television, you know, and in movies, and you know, like rock stars and famous people, you know, doing coke in fancy nightclubs and all this kind of thing. That's one kind of glamorized drug world. But then there's the kind of reality of the normal drug experience, which is usually much grimmer, you know, much more well, it's just much more horrible than the celebrity experience. You know, the actual psychological damage and physical damage is all the same. It's just again like what I said earlier about celebrities, you know, being depressed in a nicer setting. You're just destroying yourself and running away from your past in a nicer and your problems in a lovelier setting. I mean, that's essentially all that's happening. But again, I mean, it's easy to look at celebrities and think they're having a great time. Even I know people that look at social media accounts and go, they think that everyone else is having a great time but them. I mean, these people are just putting the highlights on their social media accounts. You know what I mean? Like they're making it look good. I don't think that, you know, not everyone's living some amazing life. You're not going to put on like, I mean, some people put on all the shit bits of their life on social media, but those are the kind of people that meet my block button very hard. Um, but yeah, the drugs. I mean, like when he says like narcissistic and shallow, and it's true because I mean, there's such a selfishness that goes along with drug addiction, even if you don't want to do it or whatever, you know. Like, and when I say drug addiction, I'm going to put in alcohol as well. And obviously, like I said, Manson said he was when he mentioned drugs and that he was counting it as all drugs, you know. And there's other things that explore that, like Requiem for a Dream. There was a movie and a book. That explores kind of addiction from all sides as well, because you forget about other addictions, because I mean you can have a drug addiction and you know you can say like just stop taking drugs, easier said than done, but that is a solution. It's a possible solution because you can abstain from it. But then what if you have a junk food addiction? You can't stop eating. You can stop eating junk food, but like if you say you've got a food addiction, you can't stop eating per se. So it's a kind of different relationship, you know. And it's so weird that we've evolved to have all sorts of addictions. I think it's because we're so completely over evolved that we're not spending all day just trying to thing, we just trying to find food or whatever, you know, like it's, you know, we don't have to do that, you know. Like I said, you can even like get it from, you can even get your food online now. You don't even need to do anything, you know. It's so weird and hyper real, like the world we live in. And I don't think that, it's not that I don't think we're suited for it, because we're obviously evolving to be in this kind of world, but I think that we don't know what the implications of it are. Because I mean, the internet is in the Stone Age. I mean, I can even remember before the internet, and I'm only like 31. So like, it's not. It's a fairly new invention, and we don't know what the repercussions of it are going to be. I mean, you got to remember, people thought that smoking, but we didn't know it was bad for you for a very long time. And I'm not saying per se the internet's like smoking, but you know what I mean. It's a whole different load of things. I'm not sure that we are equipped, sort of, to handle like all this information and media and stimulation being bombarded at us from all angles at all times. Like, it's never happened before in history. And in a way, Mechanical Animals does look at that, because it is so hyperreal, it is so vivid, and it is so in your face, basically, and I think it's actually more prophetic than that, but we'll get to that in a minute, because I think in a way it also describes how they how your, say, shall we say, the elites would want you to be, but we'll get to that in a minute. We'll stick on the drugs thing for a second, because he's got the classic "I don't like the drugs, but the drugs like me," and I still do get a kick out of the fact that he got a gospel choir and to sing that with him. It's hilarious, and it really works with it. And a lot of people have kind of compared that to just being quite Bowie-esque as well. Heard that a few times, but that's another one of those interesting songs, because like, he nails it again lyrically. He says there's a hole in our soul that we fill with dope and we're feeling fine. And again, we're going back to like the start when he talked about like that white room and filling the void with color and things like that. And it's kind of the same thing. It's like there is an emptiness. But what is that emptiness? I mean, some people would say the decline of religion has created the emptiness within us, and maybe so, but if religion, say like Christianity, has declined in the West, there's not much we can do about it now. So then what do you do now? You know what I mean? Because you can't make people believe in something they don't believe in. I even heard people talking before about how Nietzsche, philosopher, had kind of said that Christianity had placed truth at such an elevated position that basically that's what it destroyed itself, because it had elevated truth so highly that people kept looking for truth, and then they weren't convinced by the arguments for God anymore, sort of thing. Like, interesting theory, who knows? But again, it's another one of those songs, like, I don't like the drugs, but the drugs like me just encapsulates it too, because it's with everyone, like, ask any heroin addict, they're not going to turn around and go, I love heroin. It's nonsense, you know what I mean? Like, no alcoholic's going to say, I absolutely love it. They don't, they hate it. They just can't do without it. That's the thing. So, like, it's not that, that's the thing. It's almost like it's got a hold of you. It's like I said at the start, what Burroughs said, your whole world narrows down to junk. It's kind of the same idea. Um, it just takes over, and it becomes everything about you and everything you are, and kind of scary in a way. But that's the thing, because of, like, I'm going to talk about why it might be the case that we're, not just our over evolution, but like, so why would, like, why are we addicted to so much stuff? Well, for a start, like I said, we've got too much time to think. We don't need to forage and find food, and that's how we've got the luxury of having things like depression or things like that. Just before I go off the drugs thing, though, I should say there's a Manson quote here where he said, I advocate the use of drugs, but I've always looked down on the abuse of drugs. The people who misuse them give the rest of us a bad name. And I'm not only talking about street drugs. There are a lot of references in the album to the prescripted lifestyle that a lot of people have followed and numbed out their emotions and become mechanical. And it's kind of like, I think it was Joe Rogan that said, like, it's like, if you eat a pound of salt, you'll die. But that's not the salt's fault. That's your fault for using the salt wrong. And just because you're an idiot that used the salt wrong doesn't mean that no one should have salt, And I think it's kind of like it's a good sort of argument. The only problem is, you might be the kind of person that can do drugs recreationally on the weekend, and then you're fine and you're sound and it's cool, no bother. Or you might be the kind of person that ends up spiraling into addiction. You don't choose to spiral into addiction. That's something that's completely out with your control, and it just, it'll happen to you. You don't like it, but they like you. It's 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 so true, and even like in the video for I don't like the drugs, but the drugs like me, Manson's carrying this big cross, and it's made of like TV sets and aerials. You know, and I said in one of my songs on my album that we're in an abusive relationship with the media. And I really think we are, you know, because like media bombard you with all this. You should look like this. You should be like this. You should have this. Look at these people who are, you know, who look this way and do this stuff and have this money. And why aren't you? You know, and it's an old critique of the media, but it's always been true. There's always been like I mean, I'm not saying that I suppose it's true in art. If you look back at like statues of Greek gods, there always was an idealized lifestyle. Even if you look back to novels, I suppose there always was kind of idealized lifestyles that only very few people actually live. But in a way, it's just more. It's not like a statue that's outside somewhere now. You know, it's more. It's in your front room. It's in your house. It's in front of you. It's everywhere. It's on the screens you're looking at. You know, it's all over the place. You know what I mean? Like I don't watch television, but there's a guy in my work that watches something called Love Island, and he talks about how he feels depressed because like he doesn't look as muscular as the guys doing Love Island, and I'm like, I don't even have words. I'm not even going to try and mount a logical argument against Love Island. I just wouldn't watch it in the first place. It's called Love Island for fuck's sake, but fair enough. If that's your thing, that's cool. But even in the back to the like the drugs for the drugs like me video, you know, Manson's all in white and his head is this white peroxide blonde. So again, we're back to that whiteness, that void of color, um, the hole in our soul that we fill with dope. You know, and totally true. And I think as well, what we should mention is like, you know, like the start of I don't like the drugs, but the drugs like me, you know, he says like norm life baby, we're white and also hetero, our sex is missionary, norm life baby, we're quitters and we're sobers, our confessions will be televised. You and I are underdosed and we're ready to fall. We're raised to be stupid. We're taught to be nothing at all. And I mean, I know like the media dumbing us down is a very, very old narrative. You can even like go back to Bill Hicks talking about TV dumbing people down in the 90s, you know, like he was doing that bit then and people were doing it beforehand, you know. I believe like George Carlin did it and things like that, you know, but it's true and it's more true now. I think TV is getting stupider, if I'm perfectly honest. I mean, I remember like I used to watch it and I just had to stop, and I will occasionally go and visit people I know that have television on, and it's fucking brutal, man. Like it's just like what is going on with society? It can't just be me. And I know people that watch TV and I go, I mean, this is shite, and they go, ah, it's terrible. But they'll sit and watch it. You know, like it's crazy. Unbelievable. But um it's kind of like as well, I mean, what do you expect? I mean, like we are taught to be nothing. I mean, you go through government school and you come out and then, you know, you've been indoctrinated whatever way you were indoctrinated. I personally went to Catholic school, which was just a delight. Um, but you know, government school is government school. You know what I mean? And if you're in the US and Canada, I know it's kind of different, but here there is government Catholic schools as well. It's not a private thing. Um, and you know, I'm not a fan of government schools or government at all. Um, but that's kind of more of that's a different show altogether. You know, it's a completely different show altogether. So there's more to this as well. There's also like a kind of thing about like what you're going to be, basically like how I want to say how the elites. I don't know. I never know how to stress this because I know what I'm talking about, but it takes too long to get into what I'm talking about. If you know what I mean. Um, we obviously know there's an elite class of people in the world, you know, and I think personally, for example, the new Model 15, um, Manson kind of lays out how they would like you to be. You know, because he says, I'm as fake as a wedding cake and I'm vague and I know that I'm homopolitan, pitifully predictable, correctly political. I'm the new model. I've got nothing inside. Better in the head and in bed. At the office, I can suck it and I smile. Um, and it is kind of like this globalist capitalist citizen, you know, and basically what will be, I believe, you know, eventually when, you know, AI become when I mean, people talk about AI and things like that, right? And you know, like eventually, like you know, when we start implanting technology into ourselves, then things will get very interesting, and I'm not convinced that will be particularly a good thing. But a bit more of New Model 15 because that's one of those songs that it's flashy and it's like really kind of like 70s glam rocky and it's fun to listen to, but it's quite interesting when you actually look at the lyrics again. Like I said, how I think they would want the kind of future person to be. I can choke and die on coke. I'm spun. I know, and I know that I'm stoned and rolling. Lifelike, imposable, hopeless and disposable. Don't let them know how far you go or that you use your lovers. Oh, look, you're like a VCR. Stick something in to know just who you are. And again, it's the kind of sex thing. The people are disposable, and I suppose and I'm extrapolating it to normal people, but if Manson is talking about celebrity and that, you're even more disposable as a celebrity because there's nothing to say you're going to be one of those celebrities that's going to endure forever. You might be one of those celebrities that everyone knows and loves, and then years later you hear the name in a pub quiz or something. You're like, what happened to that person? He does say it. They love you and you're on all the covers, and you're not, and then they love another. Like if we're jumping backwards, but you know what I mean. And it's true. I mean, so you could say like, why would an elite class of people want people to be like this? Which is what I'm theorizing. Well, if all that gets you through your tedious, soul crushing workday, is the thought of going home and either doing real drugs, drinking, smoking, doing actual drugs, whatever, or watching TV and eating junk food, whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like it could be TV, religion, whatever. It doesn't really matter, like if you're just focused on that as some form of relief from your soul crushing anxiety and depression and sort of aimlessness in life, then you're not going to really form communities with people and overthrow the powers that be, are you, in some kind of heroic revolutionary fashion? Because you're too busy trying to manage your own shit to deal with any larger shit. And if your own personal microcosm is hard enough to manage and you can't start thinking in a bigger level about everything else because it's just too much to deal with, you can only deal with you can only do you, and that's taking up all your time and your effort and your energy, and you don't have time to worry about other things, and then other things can be done or imposed upon you. It's just a fact of life. And I mean, I could be all conspiratorial and say this is done on purpose, and I've read things that would suggest that to be the case, but I'm not going to make any mad claims or anything because I'm not really in the business of blowing smoke up your arse. It's arse. That's what happens when you try it. You're going to say ass and arse, and then you're like, ass sounds more kind of what people say, but arse is more authentic. That's just what happens. But yeah. So I mean, I think largely we've covered a lot of the main themes. Like I said, it's in my usual rambling style, but there is it's such a deep album. I think it's more than it's got this hyper real, like I said, glam rock feel, but it does show like in an extreme way the kind of like the weird hyper reality of the celebrity lifestyle. But then, like I said, you can when you get on the topic of drugs, which is so central to it, and it's so central to life as well. Like I said, we're not just talking about illegal narcotics, we're talking about every kind of thing you can use to subdue yourself. I mean, and then it shows you so clearly the divide between like high class drug use, low class drug use. There is a middle ground as well, but you know what I mean. There is one or the other, and like I said, like it's the same. It's the same psychologically. It's the same. It's the same. You're doing to your body, just a better setting, and it's the same with being a celebrity and being a normal person and being depressed. I mean, it's like it's the exact same. It's just a nicer setting, but it doesn't matter. The setting doesn't matter. If you feel terrible inside, then it doesn't matter where you are. You're just going to feel like shite. And if you feel great inside, again, it doesn't matter where you are, unless you're like blindfolded and walking the plank. But I don't think if you're blindfolded and walking off a plank, you're going to be feeling great unless that you're into that sort of thing, which you might be, which is fair enough. But I mean, I think this album can be. I know I'm speaking with like 20 years of hindsight, but I think you could say it's quite prophetic, because like if you look at now what I would call globalist late stage capitalism, and everything that comes in the modern world, social isolation and all that kind of thing, and social isolation is facilitated by the internet, made easier by the internet, and you don't have to, you're not forced to learn social skills like you used to maybe have to. And I'm not saying there was some idealized past where things were better. You know, every era, anyone that looks to any particular era and says things were great then is bullshitting you, because there were good things and bad things about every single era. That's just a fact. But I like looking at things like this. Like, this is what I have a lot of conversations with my friends about a lot of the time when we're wrecked, probably. But like, we often talk about, like, you know, you kind of like extrapolate more, because that's the good thing about art. It's like it can be intended to do one thing and mean one thing, but then you can have like five people in a room that listen to the same song and they've all got a different interpretation of it. And I've talked about that quite a bit in the show with other people, and it's something I like about it. And, you know, I still listen to Mechanical Animals, and I don't think that Manson has ever produced an album since then that has been as good. I think that was his, in my opinion, you know, that was really his best album, and I still listen to it quite a lot. You know, I've been particularly been listening to it more because of, obviously, I was preparing for this show, but I kind of forgot how much I liked it, you know, and I hadn't watched the videos for a while, and watching them again was really quite cool. And I mean, it was a great album and a great statement. And I think as well it does stand up. You know, it's that, and I think, you know, like, even like, just one more thing I'll mention before I forget. You know, he does mention like, eyes like Zapruder. You know, she wants me to be perfect like Kennedy, or a saint like Jackie O. You know, what is that on? That's on, what's it called? Posthuman. And that's interesting as well, because it is very, I suppose I haven't talked so much about, like, I've talked about modern culture, but it's generally satirical of kind of American celebrity culture, particularly. And I would be very shocked if Manson didn't know that, you know, Kennedy was not the way he's portrayed in the media. You know, he was like a serial adulterer. He was on all sorts of drugs. I know he had pain problems and problems like that, but like, he was certainly not any paragon of moral virtue like the media paints him to be. And I think that's a kind of satirical fart on, like, on Manson's part, because he knows that. And, you know, he's showing like Kennedy is still kind of held up in American culture and even culture around the world. Because, you know, I've from an Irish family, and, you know, my mum would tell me when I was younger that when she was younger, and, you know, Kennedy was the president, because like his family were Irish somewhere way down the line, that all these Irish people had like either framed pictures of JFK in their walls, or pictures split with JFK and Bobby Kennedy on them. And like, people didn't really know the reality, you know, but like, you know, he wasn't perfect at all. You know, it's just that's kind of what Manson does in this album. It's like the shine over what's really underneath. You know, there's this kind of shine in this way that stuff is presented to you, and then you dig into that stuff and you realize that it's not how it's presented to you at all. And Kennedy's a good example of that, because, you know, he's presented in one way, and then you look at who, and it's like, it's not that at all. And if you don't know it, that she's got eyes like Zapruder thing. Zapruder, he was the guy, that was the second name, that shot that famous film of Kennedy being shot, where you actually see him getting shot. Um, Again, you know, and Manson did that in Coma White. Nearly can't forget that, you know, like, in the end of the album, he does actually, you know, like, Coma White's an interesting song. I've actually got a quote from Manson on it, but yeah, he full on dresses up as him in the video. If you've not seen it, you've got to see the video. And, you know, he does the whole bit where he gets shot and all the rest of it. And it's, again, it's like it's taking something that's like a sort of almost like an American sacred cow in a way, you know, the sort of Kennedy thing, and then just, I mean, I think that annoyed a lot. But I was going to say, I think that annoyed a lot of people. I think like pretty much everything Manson does annoys a lot of people. But he actually said about Coma White, yeah, he said, there is a bit of a love story that exists on this record. The name I gave to the thing I was in love with was Coma White. It starts as the name of a girl I'm in love with, then ends up to really be a drug I've been taking, so I'm not really sure what I'm in love with. And then if you take what he said there and take the lyrics, a pill to make you numb, a pill to make you dumb, a pill to make you anybody else, but all the drugs in this world won't save her from herself. I mean, it kind of like, you can, yeah, you can see complete. I don't even need to explain that to you. You can see exactly where he's coming from. Can't believe I was summing up there. I almost never put that wee bit in. But yeah, like I said, you know, I'm talking from hindsight, and I'll do this with a lot of other stuff. This will be, you know, just another part of my never-ending series of me reading more into stuff than like what's into it. But I think that's kind of one of the points of art, is that because art can be so subjective, that's what leads to conversations, because it will make you think of something, and then it'll make you make connections in your brain, and then it leads you to, like, explore different things. And I think that's what good art should do. That's why kind of boring, superficial music really depresses me, because it doesn't give you anything to really work with, anything to really think about, and I think that good art is going to provoke you in some way, and it's going to make you think about something, and I mean, it's kind of been a negative view, sort of, um, kind of overall, but that's just the way. I don't see things going, great, but that's just kind of how it is. I suppose, why don't we finish off with a bit of a quote from the album, from Fundamentally Loathsome. I am resigned to this wicked fucking world on its way to hell. The living are dead, and I hope to join them too. I know what to do, and I do it well.